Hi everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Staying on Track with Major Gifts, Accountability Tools and Techniques. Thank you so much for taking a couple of hours out of your day today. We're very excited. My name is Jenny Taylor and I'm the Community Manager here at GuideStar. As a few additional housekeeping items before we begin. First, we're going to be live tweeting during today's presentation using the hashtag MajorGiftsTools. So please join the conversation on Twitter. Secondly, we are happy to take questions from you all during the presentation. While the Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation, you are more than welcome to submit questions at any time. And if we can't get to all of your questions before our time is up today, we'll be sure to post more of the answers on the GuideStar blog at trust.guidestar.org soon. And finally, we will send all of you an email with a link to the presentation and today's recording in a few days. I'm now happy to introduce Amy Eisenstein. Amy is an author, speaker, coach, and fundraising consultant who's dedicated to making nonprofit development simple for you and your board. Her books include 50 Asks in 50 Weeks, Raising More with Less, and her latest book, Major Gift Fundraising for Small Shops, was just released in March. So welcome, Amy, and the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm happy to be here. And you said thanks for giving us a couple hours today. I just want to remind everybody we're going to do 1 hour, so it's only till 2 o'clock. So if anybody was panicked, they only have to spend 1 hour on the phone with us. So anyways, just to get us started, I am going to ask some questions. I wonder, have you ever wondered why it's so difficult to stay on track with major gifts? And have you ever felt frustrated because you're not as successful as you'd like to be at raising major gifts? And are there roadblocks, or what are the roadblocks in your way that you just cannot seem to get around in order to raise major gifts? So if you are nodding or thinking yes to any of those questions, it's my goal today to provide you with several tools and techniques for you to choose from that will help you get around some of these barriers and other issues that are holding you back from raising major gifts. But first, I want to tell you a story before we really get into it. The other day, I actually found myself reading an obituary, which was authored by a man named John. Now, John was actually the deceased person himself, so the author was also who the obituary was about, because John had had a terminal illness and decided he was going to write his own obituary, which was, of course, published after his death. And it read like a letter to his loved ones, and it started out pretty funny. He said he was sorry he was no longer available to take out the trash or do the laundry. But then it got to be a little more serious when he went through some of his bucket list items that he had or hadn't done in his life. And the letter or obituary was interesting because it really reminded me to focus on what's important in life and to live the way we want to be remembered and to pay attention to what's really important. And the one thing I think that most people want to be remembered for is doing something meaningful with their lives. Now, I just love this tombstone because the 4 little words say it all. Scholar, teacher, leader, friend. You know that person had an impact and had a meaningful life. So that sort of leads me to think about why we raise major gifts in the first place, and really why it's so important to stay on track with them. What does it say about our lives and our purpose for living and for being here? So before we get to this slide, sorry, I jumped the gun a little bit. It's been actually several studies have shown, and it's been well documented, that meaningful work and happiness and productivity are all interconnected. In other words, if you're doing meaningful work, you'll be happier. And if you're happier at work, then you'll be more productive. So I'll come back to that in a minute. I just wanted to insert that while we were sort of looking at this tombstone of this person who had a meaningful life. But I want to tell you another quick story first. A few years back, I worked with a founding executive director. His name was Norm, and he started a research organization to cure a rare form of cancer. Well, why do you think he founded this group? Well, of course, his wife had this rare form of cancer. And when he got around to starting this organization, his wife was really sick. She was on her deathbed, and through his hard work, he actually got her into a clinical trial, and he saved her life and that of many others. And more than 10 years later, she's still with us today, living cancer-free. An amazing, amazing story of success for this nonprofit organization and this founding executive director. And so this guy, he goes out and asks for major gifts every week. And he is super motivated, and everything inside him, his whole reason for being, is about fundraising for this particular cause. And the reason that I tell you this story is because it's a big part of staying on track with major gifts is understanding why you're raising them. Why are you raising major gifts? What's the intrinsic value to you? Why is it important? I just think it's such a important concept to think about. The other reason why we raise major gifts is basic math, right? Let's say that your annual fund or your holiday appeal or any kind of campaign that you do raises $100,000. It's a big effort, and you raise $100,000. If it's your holiday appeal, maybe you have 200 donors. Maybe the average gift is $50. Some people give a lot more. A few people give a lot more. Many people give a lot less, and you raise $100,000. But then you get one major gift of $10,000, and it increases the results for your campaign by 10%. What does that do for your organization or the effort you're doing, the campaign you're running? Now you may be thinking, all right, 10%, that's not very much, or maybe our numbers are much bigger than that, and that's fine. What if you get 2 gifts of that size, or 3, or 5? 5 gifts, just 5 gifts, can increase your results by 50%. Of course, I understand, depending on the campaign and where you're at, but that's the kind of impact that major gifts should have on your campaigns and your organizations. And in order to really stay on track with major gifts, I believe it's so important to understand why you're raising them, what kind of impact they can have on your organization and your mission, because it's too easy to get off track. If we keep understanding what the intrinsic value is, both in terms of what the mission is, what the cause is that we're raising them for, and in terms of the basic math about what they can do to our fundraising results, I think it's going to be a little easier to stay on track. So now we're going to look at the 3 main points I'm going to discuss today. 1 is think happy thoughts. 2, we're going to talk about how to stay focused. And 3, we're going to talk about how to build better habits. All 3 things we're going to keep in mind how to stay on track raising major gifts. So my first point is think happy thoughts. As I mentioned briefly, study after study show that happiness at work and life is linked to productivity. And The good news for you is that a study called the Happiness at Work Survey from 2012 showed that people who work at caregiving or direct service are 75% more likely to be happy. So I'm going to assume that that includes most of us in the nonprofit sector. To me, one of the reasons that you went into nonprofit work in the first place is to do meaningful work. And I'm guessing that you're not necessarily getting compensated financially as you would be in the private sector, so I hope there's other compensation, like intrinsic value. In other words, feeling great and happy about your work. And the Happiness at Work survey of 2012 that I mentioned just a minute ago also found that people who were happy were 31% more productive and 3 times more creative. So what do I mean when I say think happy thoughts? What does that mean? I'm a true believer in the power of positive thinking. If you think you can, then you can. If you think you can't, then you can't. Just think about that for a moment, and whether or not you truly believe that you can raise major gifts. And I guess that you may have some doubts about your ability to raise major gifts, and that's okay. What I'm going to talk about today is that if you change your belief, then you can change the outcome. Let me say that again. If you change the belief, you can change the outcome. Because once you change your belief, you'll change your actions to support that belief, right? Change the belief and you'll change your actions to support that belief. So, for example, if you believe I can't raise money, then the action you'll take is to sit in your office, procrastinating, playing on the internet, complaining to colleagues about your lack of prospects, etc., and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So instead, what if you think, I know they're going to give me a gift. I just don't know what kind yet. What action would you take to support that belief? So recently, I was on a flight to a speaking engagement, and I was sitting next to a woman in the airplane, and we got to chatting, and I told her what I was traveling to do, and she said that she believes it's human nature to expect the worst from people. If someone doesn't call you back, you think it's because they don't want to talk with you, right? And what if they're just really busy or away on vacation or dealing with a family crisis? So what if we expect the best instead of assuming the worst? So I believe that if you truly believe you can raise major gifts this year, you're going to act on those beliefs. You're going to pick up the phone, you're going to call donors, and you're going to start to schedule meetings to make it happen. On the other hand, if you're thinking they probably won't give me a gift, then of course you'll take the next necessary actions and steps to support that belief. So you may be thinking, I can't change the way I think or act. You know, Amy, I'm not with you on this one, so give me another minute. I was waiting in the airport, again, a few weeks back, traveling for a speaking engagement. Maybe it was a board retreat I was flying to. And many of the planes around me were being delayed and canceled. And as you can imagine, there was chaos in the airport. Well, some of the people seemed fine with the news. They had brought something to read and a snack, and they sort of expected this as part of traveling. And others, of course, were absolutely furious. Well, both sets of people were all in the same boat and had received the exact same information in the exact same setting, But some took the news well, and others were, of course, extremely upset at the planes being canceled. Now, I understand there are some exceptions in terms of where you're going and what you're doing, but in general, why are some people bothered by these types of situations and others take them in stride? And I think it's all in the attitude you choose to adopt. You could be furious that your plane was canceled, or you could be okay with whatever situation you're in. You know, I always tell my kids who are 7 and 10, you always have a choice about the way you react to situations, especially the ones that are out of your control. For example, it was pouring the other day, and my son's soccer game got canceled. So he was upset about it, and I said, you know what? It's your choice. It can either ruin your day, or you can find something fun to do inside instead. Now, I know that's just a childish example, but I think it carries through. Another reason to think happy thoughts is that it's, again, been documented that happy people attract happy people. You may have read one of the many books out now on the law of attraction. And it has been shown in several studies that people who give to charity are happier than those who don't. Right? You may have heard this. It's been documented, people who give to charity self-report as being happier than those who don't give to charity. So the ability to attract happy people is key, which is why it's important for you to think happy thoughts. So the bottom line is you can do anything you set your mind to if you just think happy thoughts and believe in yourself. Now, I know I'm going to get to the more nuts and bolts, but I thought I'd start with that. I hope you will start to see the donors as wanting to give and even expecting to give. It's only the details of the gift that you need to work out. They want to give. If you believe they want to give, then they're going to give. More people are going to give than not. So think happy thoughts, take the appropriate actions, and you will stay on track and raise more money. Okay. Now, the second point we're going to talk about is how to stay focused. My first job in fundraising was at a battered women's shelter, and I was a one-person development shop. I was busy planning events, writing grants, managing a database, sending thank you notes, writing newsletters, doing all the stuff that you do in a one-person development shop. And I was all over the place, running from one activity to the next. There really wasn't time for major gift fundraising or meeting with donors. I was raising money and working hard, but I have to say I just look back and think how much more I could have raised if I had concentrated even a little bit on raising major gifts. Now, hindsight is 20/20, and it was my first job out of college, but I really didn't know how to prioritize or organize my day. Well, so that's just one story, but regardless of where you are in your career, I believe that we can all use a little refocusing in our lives. So I want you to think about what stands in the way between you and major gifts and how you might be able to prioritize your workload better. Now, there are many good tools available to help you prioritize your tasks, but here's my take on an oldie but goodie. This diagram will help you think about your tasks and activities by identifying how important and or urgent they are compared with your overall goals. So in the top left, we have important goals, both urgent and important. They need to be done right away. In the top right are critical activities, important but not urgent, and they need to be done soon. Bottom left, distractions. These are urgent but not necessarily important. So how can you delegate or reschedule these? And then, of course, in the bottom right are interruptions. They're not important and not urgent. And they're important to avoid or ignore altogether if you possibly can. But what this really shows is how the urgent gets in the way of the important and lays out, how to prioritize your workload. I want you to take just a minute now to think about what's on your urgent but not important list that's been getting in the way of you staying on track for raising major gifts. Now, I really hope that you'll come back to this diagram after the webinar and take the time to identify the tasks that you do throughout the week and place them in the appropriate quadrant. I think you're going to be surprised to see how much time you're spending in the bottom half of the chart. And the question is, how can you do it differently? So the next tool I want to discuss in terms of staying focused, that's what we're talking about, how to stay focused on major gifts, is a weekly development team meeting. Now, you may already have a weekly development team meeting, but not this kind of development team meeting. And I bet you also may be thinking, if you're in a small shop, what development team? So first let me cover the what development team part. Your development team is anybody that's available that's working on development with you at your organization. So the first person on your development team is the executive director. Whether they want to or not, they're on the development team. If you have any fundraising staff, of course, they're also part of the development team. Your administrative assistant, if they help with setting up calls or meetings or generating thank you letters, they can be part of the development team meeting. You can also include board members if you want to or if you need to because your development team is so small. This meeting can take place on the phone. And I said that this development team meeting is different from your normal development weekly meeting, perhaps, because this meeting is only 10 minutes long. Now, you may be thinking, how are we going to keep this meeting to only 10 minutes when we have so much to discuss? Well, two things. One is there are only 2 agenda items on this development team meeting. And it's the same 2 agenda items every single week with regard to major gifts. Agenda item number 1 is, what did we do last week to move our major gifts program along? Did we get it done? How did it go? What follow-up needs to be done? And, of course, the second agenda item is, what needs to be done to move our major gifts program along? What asks are coming up? Who's responsible, or cultivation meetings, or whatever the case may be? What are our next steps? Who's responsible, and who's going to be getting them done? So that's your development team meeting. And the reason that you can keep it to only 10 minutes is because the rule for this development team meeting is, first, of course, the 2 agenda items only. But the second rule is you can bring your coffee, but you can't sit down. So this is a stand-up only meeting. And that's why you can include your board members on the phone. It can be the president of your board, or your development committee chair, if you don't have, if you want to include them in your development team and they're willing to participate, that's great. So that's one of the tools to stay focused, is a weekly development team just dedicated to staying on track with major gifts. That's the whole topic of the meeting. Don't talk about events, don't talk about grants, don't talk about the annual appeal. This is a 10-minute weekly meeting to keep you on track with major gifts. Now, I love social media and the Internet as much as anyone, but since we're on the topic of staying focused, I thought I would share this statistic with you, right? Because we're staying on focus. So tweeting costs the country $112 billion per year. Time management experts increasingly see Twitter as the silent productivity killer. Retweeting costs us an additional $65.6 billion. Now, I know we're live tweeting today, and I'm all about the Twitter, but just think about this when we're trying to stay on track and how distracted we can get by Twitter and other forms of social media from time to time. Now, along the same lines, every time management book and study I've ever read talks about how email and our obsession with checking it and responding as soon as it comes is a huge reason for low productivity and, of course, lack of focus. So each time we stop a task to check email, or you stop a task to check your email, or it blinks on your screen, or it bings on your phone, it takes us on average an additional 10 minutes or more to refocus on the task that we were working on before the email came through. So that means that if we're checking email 5 times per day, and I'm guessing that you probably check it many more times than that, that's a total loss of 50 minutes daily in terms of loss in productivity. So experts recommend checking email only twice a day. I know I haven't mastered that yet, but I just wanted to pass it along. I think it's important. It's a goal I'm working on. Checking email once mid-morning and once in the late afternoon, and really setting all of our email settings so that they do not bing at us and do not flash up on the screen every time email comes. So I really work hard to check it at 10 a.m. and at 3 or 4 p.m. So that I'm getting back to everybody the same day, but that I'm not getting distracted while I'm doing big projects. So I want you to really think about it and start to maybe keep track of how many times each day you stop and check and respond to email that's completely taking you off focus of the task at hand. So in terms of staying focused, I want you to practice just saying no. If we're going to be able to stay focused on the task at hand and major gifts and have more time for raising major gifts, we're going to have to become better at saying no. And this is another thing that I'm working on. It's a work in progress, I admit. For example, I have to say anytime my kids' school sends out a request for volunteers, I feel immense pressure just from myself to say yes. And it's so bad that one time I volunteered to be a wrangler at the school play, and the wrangler's job is to be with the kids who are off stage and wrangle them. And I was doing this during a week where I had a board retreat out of town, and I was flying somewhere else to speak. And so I was barely getting home from my workday when I was running to the school play. And it got so out of hand that I actually didn't get to see the play because I was back with the kids, off stage and in the classrooms. And it's just terrible. And so I'm wondering if you have other things like that. But specifically, have you ever been in a situation where a board member suggests yet another fundraising event? And is your automatic go-to response, yes, we can do it, because it's a board member, after all, that's suggesting it, and you just can't say no? So what do you do in that situation if a board member suggests yet another fundraising event and you want to focus on major gifts? So what I suggest to my clients is that what you do in that particular situation is ask the board member to come up with a budget, both revenue and expense. And once they see how little the event will make in terms of net revenue, the issue is often dropped. But many development directors and executive directors really feel hard-pressed to say no to a board member. So one of my tools for staying on track with major gifts is practicing saying no. Now, another great tool to keep you on track and focused is an accountability partner. An accountability partner is anyone that you can have a 10-minute call with every week. It's much like the development team meeting. So I'm actually giving you a whole bunch of tools, and you can pick the one or ones that work best for you. You don't necessarily have to do both because they might be slightly redundant. But I find an accountability partner to be a great tool and resource. It can be your boss. It can be a board member. It can be a colleague at a different organization who's in a similar situation to you. And this is a person you check in with over the phone for 10 minutes every week, and you each tell each other, okay, this is what I'm going to do this week to move major gifts forward, and next week you're going to ask me, did I do it? Right? It's a great tool to focus and have to keep you on track and on focus, to have an accountability partner. Now, personally, I love a good to-do list to keep myself focused. I am a list maker and a goal setter, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I have goals and lists for each year, each month, each week, and yes, every day. And that's how I stay on track with my to-dos. So keeping lists and setting goals might be a good tool for you, or you might prefer another technique. But however you decide that you're going to stay on track, you want a system for keeping positive thoughts and keeping you moving forward. Now, I have to say that until a few years ago, I really had never thought about writing a book. It just simply was not on my radar screen. And then all of a sudden it was. But how on earth would I manage this seemingly monstrous task of writing a whole book? But then somebody told me that if I wrote 1 page per day, I would have a 365-page book in 1 year. Well, write 1 page per day? Yeah, I could do that. And while, of course, none of my books are actually 365 pages, only 6 years later, after that initial epiphany, I've published 3 books. And so a to-do list and ways for keeping yourself on track with a huge task, whether it's raising major gifts or writing a book, I find to be so, so important. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of keeping on focus, staying focused, is that anytime you want to regain your focus, just take a moment. Take a deep breath, and you will get some clarity. You can do anything you set your mind to, if only you stay focused. Now, I just want to say again that you don't need to use all of the tools I'm suggesting to stay focused on major gifts. What I'm trying to do today is to give you a toolbox. It's up to you to choose the right tools for you and for your organization. So the final thing that I want to talk about, the third big topic, is building better habits. I think it's so important to build better habits to stay on track. And the first thing I'm going to do is argue that you cannot raise major gifts if you're chained to your desk, as opposed to out meeting with donors. However, being chained to your desk or being stuck at your desk is only a habit or a work pattern that we're used to and that we're in, but it actually can be broken. So I'd like to digress for just a moment and compare raising major gifts with weight loss. So we all know how to lose weight, right? You eat less, you exercise more. It's the execution that can be so challenging. So my suggestion for successful weight loss and raising major gifts is to build better habits, which is the topic we're talking about now. Now, I used to eat dessert every single night. Well, it was a habit, and it was something that I'd come to crave and depend on that sweet at the end of every day. So in order to break an old habit and create a new one, I needed to find a reward so that I could feel that high, that sense of accomplishment, that joy, even if I skipped dessert. And I finally broke the habit when I discovered that the best way, the only way that I've found for me to lose weight was to cut out the nightly snack. Now, if I stop eating by 6 p.m., almost regardless of what I've eaten during the day, I lose weight. A smaller number on the scale, of course, is my reward. So most people actually are only chained to their desk out of habit. It's their work pattern or habit. So once you make calling donors and getting out to a meeting and meeting them on a regular basis, once that's the priority, that will become your habit. So another habit you may need to break is the habit of letting the urgent get in the way of the important. Remember that chart that I showed earlier, the diagram? Is the urgent getting in the way of the important? So you may have heard of the book by Brian Tracy called Eat That Frog. This is not the cover to the book. I just happen to love the picture. And it turns out that eating a frog is actually a Mark Twain concept. And Mark Twain came up with the concept of eating a frog to mean doing your worst task first. So instead of saving it for last and not getting to it, you're going to do your worst task first. So if major gifts or anything associated with it is horrible to you or seems awful, doing it first, getting it out of the way, you'll have your whole day ahead of you to look forward to once you've eaten that frog. Now, I'll tell you that when I worked at the battered women's shelter, it was my first job, like I said, and for the longest time, I had a list of phone calls to make to individuals that were either big donors already or potential donors to the shelter. But I have to admit that as a younger fundraiser, the thought of calling some of these older, wealthier people scared me to death. And it's not like I didn't have plenty to do. I had events to plan. I had newsletters to write. I had databases to manage. I had emails to return. I had so much work to do that I let this list of phone calls to make sit on my desk day after day after day. And they were really the most important work I had to do, but I didn't want to do it. I didn't eat my frog. And honestly, weeks and even months passed by without me calling these donors. And it wasn't that I wasn't working hard. I was working hard. But they were always at the bottom of a long to-do list, and I put them at the bottom so that I didn't have to do them. So hopefully a tool for building better habits is to start to eat your frog at the beginning of every day, the beginning of every week. Now, it's also similar to something I like to call the Monday morning ask. And this is another tool that I use to break out of your bad habits. And I have two suggestions. One is the Monday morning ask, and that's where I schedule my whole week around making sure that I'm making an ask on Monday morning. Now, you may not have enough major gift asks especially if you're at the beginning of raising major gifts, to ask every week. But the ask doesn't necessarily have to be for money. It can be an ask to invite somebody for a tour. It can be an ask for a meeting. And so the ask itself, if it's for money, doesn't have to take place on Monday morning, but the call to the donor takes place on Monday morning. Because if I had had a Monday morning ask rule when I was back at the shelter, I wouldn't have put off those calls for weeks or months, because Monday morning would have come and I would have said, okay, I have to make an ask today. It's Monday morning, and get it out of the way, and honestly eat that frog and do it. And so then the rest of the week, it's like a relief, and the rest of your workload seems easier because you've made that call. You've made that ask on Monday morning. So along the same lines, I like to have a make 3 calls a day rule. And so when every day, if you're in major gifts, I think you should be making 3 calls a day. Now, if that's to set up a meeting, ask somebody for a tour, whatever the case may be. So that's another tool for building better habits. If it's your habit to make 3 calls in the morning, you will be way more on track with raising major gifts. I also want to talk about the importance of celebrating success. I think that should be a habit also. Too often, our habit is to focus on the negative instead of the positive. What they didn't do for us. Of course they said no, or how we messed up. We replay these scenarios over and over and over in our mind. We didn't get the gift, or we screwed up. And these are the negative scenarios that replay in our minds over and over. So instead, I want you to focus on positive. So in order to set all of your new good habits, to make them permanent habits, you're going to need to reward yourself. So what can you do after you've made 3 donor calls? Now, can you get out of the office and take a 5-minute walk? Can you listen to your favorite song, or even dance around the office? So this last and final habit I want to leave you with really is to celebrate success. Make sure you're doing that. A development director, friend of mine named Bill, he kicks off every staff meeting with a brag session. Any staff member who has good news gets to share it with the group, and they're encouraged to do so. And that keeps them focused on the positive, and they celebrate together as a group. And everyone is motivated to have something to share at the brag session. So in terms of staying on track for major gifts, it is a great tool to use. So in order to stay on track with major gifts, I really hope and encourage you to think happy thoughts, to stay focused, ultra-focused, and build better habits. So I challenge you to start this today. Because honestly, if not now, if you don't start today, when are you going to do it? I hope that you will pick one concept from each of these 3 categories that you're going to commit to adding to your major gifts toolbox today. Because otherwise, you're going to be like this, now, later, never. So I hope you will pick one from each category and let me know how it goes. I'd love to hear. But now, Jenny, we have a few minutes for questions if you have any that came through, and I'm happy to stay on the line for a few minutes if anybody has any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy. Those are such helpful tips. We do have a couple questions, and we have some more coming in, so I'm going to throw a few your way since we've got some time. The first question we have is from a one-person development team. She's wondering what your tips are on determining what tasks are important or not important, such as like how to make time or how much time should be devoted to daily stewardship tasks versus long-term major gifts planning.
Yeah, it's such a good question and so challenging about determining how to allocate your time. And I think that you, in a small shop, need to figure out how to best leverage those around you. So are there any volunteers or board members who can help with any of the stewardship tasks? Maybe you have a volunteer for 2 hours a week who can do thank you notes, who can make thank you calls, and who can help with those stewardship tasks that you have on your plate, because, of course, you don't want to put any of it aside. But I do work with a lot of small organizations that are doing events that are taking up a ton of the development director's time and really not yielding the results that you're looking for or that would be appropriate for the amount of time you're spending. So my question is, can you do a real analysis of the events that you're doing and see if any of them can be cut or eliminated? I like to tell people, focus on the 1 or 2 events that are most successful and get rid of the rest. That certainly will free up a ton of time. But in a really small shop, you could also have volunteers do some grant writing. So I hope that answers the question.
Great tips, for sure. I think there are a lot of people who are in the small shops. We've got a couple questions about setting up meetings with donors. We have somebody asking about how to start that habit of setting meetings, and specifically, if these are new connections, what is the approach that works the best without simply asking for a donation straight off the bat?
Yeah, you definitely, especially if we're talking about major gifts, never want to ask for a gift on the first meeting or first visit, because fundraising, as you know, is about relationships, and you don't have a relationship on the first meeting. So you really never want to ask for a gift at the first meeting. So if you're trying to get a meeting with somebody new, the first step would be to see if you have any current connections. Do any staff or board members know this person where they can help make the introduction? If that's not the case, I am all about asking for advice. So I think you're much more likely to get a person to meet with you if you're looking for advice for them, rather than if you just say you want to meet them to tell them about the organization. So if you have somebody that you're interested in meeting and you call them up and you say, I'd like to come tell you about my organization, they're going to say, well, I can read about it online or send me the information. There's really no reason to meet. But if you tell them, well, you're a well-respected person in the community, or you've been a donor to our organization, or so-and-so suggested that I call you, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and I can meet you at your convenience at your home or office. But what I'd really like to do is ask your advice. And you can ask them advice about, do they know anything about your organization? How are you perceived in the community? What should you do to improve your reputation in the community? Are they familiar with your programs or services? What do they like about them, or what do they think needs to be improved? So those types of advice questions, because people do like to give advice and are much more likely to take a meeting with you if that's the motivation. But of course you have to be genuine in wanting it and valuing their feedback. So I hope that helps.
Excellent. And kind of along those same lines, do you find that phone calls are better than emails when setting up these meetings or advice sessions? What do you find are people's preferred way of communication?
Yeah, I think it really varies widely from person to person. Sometimes I'll do we call it a pre-call, and back in the day, and I think some people still do this, send a pre-call letter. So sometimes I'll send a pre-call email saying, I am going to be calling you because I'd like to set up a meeting to ask your advice. And, the pre-call email or letter warms them up to your call, so they're more likely to answer the phone or be willing to talk to you. But they may just respond and say, hey, no need to call, what do you want? Or I'll set a date. And those people are more email people. So try and figure out what the person likes to do. And if you can find that out quickly, then use their preferred mode of communication.
Excellent. And how many donor meetings or calls should people be aiming for, say, a month or a year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that widely depends on how big your office is. So, this was a general staying on track with major gifts. So if somebody asked me that who their full-time job is major gifts and that's their job title and that's their primary responsibility, then of course they would have many more meetings and much higher expectations in terms of meetings than somebody who's in a small shop, a one-person development shop, where they're also responsible for grant writing and events and all the other components of fundraising. So I like to, what I suggest in my new book on major gifts fundraising for small shops is that a person who's responsible for everything start a major gifts program with a prospect list of 20 people and a meeting or 2 or 3 per month. On the other hand, somebody who's a major gifts officer is going to have closer to 100 or maybe even 150 prospective donors as opposed to a list of 20. And then they're going to have at least a couple of meetings a week probably. So very different expectations depending on what your other responsibilities are.
Excellent. And speaking of your book, this segues nicely. Someone just received a copy of it and is wondering if there are scripts in there for asking or setting up meetings, or if not, what kind of step-by-step guides they can expect in the book.
Yeah, there are definitely there are scripts for the ask, for sure. There's guidelines on how to set up a meeting. And I also talk, if anybody wants to check out my stuff first without buying a book, a lot of that information also is on my blog. So you can sign up on my website to get free e-blasts when a new blog post comes out, or you can just search my blog for the topic you're looking for. But yes, that stuff is, scripts are definitely in the book.
Excellent. And staying on that line of these important asks, corporate gifts and grant making are becoming more and more common. And I had somebody ask if there's an optimum time of day to reach these corporate prospects by phone, especially given caller ID these days and how difficult they can be to reach.
Yeah, I think that a lot of getting into the corporations is going through the gatekeeper, which is often the administrative person. So having a connection, like a board member knowing the person you're trying to reach, makes that significantly easier. I recommend looking at people on LinkedIn to see who they're connected to that I'm connected to. But I really want people to understand, especially if they're looking at this major gifts fundraising, is that we're not talking about corporations here. Although certainly you may be getting major gifts or grants from corporations, but corporations and foundations combined only give 20% of the philanthropic dollars every year. And so I want organizations to get more into individual giving. So I hope, even though obviously corporations and foundations are wonderful supporters of our nonprofits, I'm not knocking them in any way, but it's only a fraction of the major gifts that are out there, and I hope that you will take this information to get focused on individuals.
That's a great reminder. And how important are print materials about your organizations in terms of these big asks?
Yeah, to me, it depends on the donor if they're interested in them. I would not spend money on making glossy, fancy handouts. I would spend more money on your website and refer them there. I think that's where many more people are looking these days. You can certainly have some nice Microsoft Word documents in color that you print out every time you go to somebody without having to order, a major print job. And then you can customize them to the person that you're talking to. So if somebody's interested in one component of your program, you can give them an extra sheet or 2 on that. The problem with having these fancy printouts is that they're practically out of date the day you print them, and you've spent all this money on them. So I don't think it's worth it anymore.
Excellent. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and this goes into your great discussion on forming new habits and focusing. And a lot of people responded to the stepping away from email. I think that's a source of, we're a little antsy to not do that. If you have a boss that's expects you to be changed to your email, do you have any advice as to starting that conversation as to why it's important for you to step away for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I am a big fan of giving my boss choices when I have one. I say, listen, I can focus my energies on major gifts with the potential results being X, Y, Z, or I can spend my time over here responding to fires and emergencies and not getting to the important. And I would even show them that grid that I put up and say, look, the email responses and all the urgent things, the emails and the staff meetings are taking my focus away from this kind of fundraising. And, sort of almost leave it up to the boss. And they'd be hard-pressed to say they want you to focus on little stuff rather than big stuff.
Excellent. Actually, I'm going to throw in one final question. You have great advice to celebrate wins and positive things happening. If you're just getting started or it seems like things to celebrate are kind of rare, how do you suggest to get out of that funk and really focus on the great things that lie ahead?
Yeah, great question. So I'm all about celebrating the little successes as much as the big. So I wish I had said this. Celebrating success does not necessarily just mean getting a gift. It can be getting a meeting with someone that you wanted a meeting with. It can be getting someone to come take a tour of your organization. It can be talking to 4 or 5 people on the phone that you had been trying to reach. So I would share and celebrate little successes just as much as the big ones. And so if you get a board member involved in fundraising, celebrate that. There's lots of things to celebrate.
Excellent. Great way to end it. Thank you so much, Amy, for taking time to be here today. And thank you, everyone on the phone, for spending some time with us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. And keep an eye out for our upcoming webinars at GuideStar.org/webinars, And again, if we didn't get to your question today, please check our blog at trust.guidestar.org for additional answers. And keep an eye out for that email coming soon with the copy of this presentation and the recording. Thank you all so much again, and have a wonderful day.